Hello everybody, Jeffrey here with another episode of Auto Alchemy, and today I'm coming at you with something a little bit special. Today I'll be doing a book review. Do you guys remember how on my channel trailer I said I'd be doing book reviews? If you forgot, that's totally okay because I did too. Well, those days are long behind us and the time has finally come because I've been doing a ton of reading lately and I want to make book reviews a priority. I think I've mentioned before that I want to get back to the basics with this whole typology thing, so I've been looking a lot at Carl Jung and at people following in his footsteps, and I really enjoy reading all of that. The only issue is that it sometimes veers into mystical territory, which is totally fine by me, but it becomes very impenetrable and hard to dissect, so I thought we would get started somewhere a little more accessible. Today we will be looking at an upside-down book called Gifts Differing by Isabel Briggs Myers and her son, Peter Briggs Myers. Now, if you can believe it, this book was published in 1980. That's almost 40 years ago. And if you didn't know, Isabel Briggs Myers actually created the MBTI with her mother, Catherine Cook Briggs. So this whole thing is kind of a family affair, which I find really interesting. Okay, so the purpose of the book is to adapt Carl Jung's work on psychological types. What you might not know is that Jung's musings on typology are kind of treated as a secondary thing in the analysis of his work. People who follow him, Jungian analysts, they see it more as a curiosity. They deal more with things like dream analysis and other forms of inner work, and the typology is just an amusing thing that he explored in a pretty hefty book as far as I know. It also doesn't help that in his original work on type, he was treating very purified versions of the types. So instead of drawing any kind of distinction between an INTP and an ISTP, he wrote a huge profile on the introverted thinking type. So a lot of those distinctions were kind of smushed for the sake of clarity and for the sake of elucidating. And I think the reason for that is that Jung saw that the primary function creates this huge void in the inferior function, and that's going to just really set the tone for the kinds of difficulties you're going to face in life. So if he's dealing with people who are mentally unwell, obviously he's going to want a very straightforward version of this whole theory. And so on the other hand, Isabel Briggs Myers wanted to make typology more accessible. She wanted it to find its way into the hands of healthy, well-adjusted people, not just people who are sitting in the office of a psychoanalyst. And she wanted to create a framework and a language that people could use to understand themselves, but also understand other people and navigate things like marriage, careers, seeking some sort of sustaining meaning in life. So let's get started by talking about what I enjoyed about the book. Whatever else I think about the book, I am 100% supportive of the heart of the book. I feel like it really overlaps a great deal with things that I care about. And I think that the spirit of the book is pretty well summed up by the biblical epigram, so I will go ahead and read that to you guys. For as we have many members in one body, and all members have not the same office, so we, being many, are one body, and every one members one of another, having then gifts differing. So even though I'm not particularly religious, I find that sentiment to be really beautiful, and I do have some spiritual leanings, and I just feel like that captures so well the heart of what those spiritual leanings are. It's that image of the world, or maybe even the universe, as a single living organic thing that's growing through time, and each piece has a vital part to play, even though all of these individual pieces don't see how they're contributing to that organic whole. And to me, that's just good stuff. Another thing that I really appreciated about the book was the historical perspective. It just kind of places everything in context. Isabel and her mother created the MBTI partially in response to World War II. On a practical level, they were trying to create something that would help with job placement during the war efforts. But on a more idealistic level, they were trying to create a shared language that people could use to navigate through conflict and maybe even ultimately avoid the tragedies of war. It was also super fascinating and kind of badass to read about the uphill battle that Isabel had to face whenever she was working on the MBTI. She was very much an outsider to the community of psychology, and so she had to teach herself statistics and test construction and learn all about validity. And even when she faced people who were skeptical, she wasn't really daunted by that, which is something that I can admire because I think that I probably would have been. But yeah, she pretty much just powered through the naysayers and would go directly to college deans and high school principals and say, "Hey, here's something that I devised with my mother. Would you think about administering it to your students?" Another huge virtue of the book is that it actually talks about cognitive functions. Now, I was under the impression that the MBTI didn't really treat the functions in any serious way. So when I started reading this book, I was kind of expecting to get those really basic dichotomies of you're a judger, you're a perceiver, you're a thinker, you're a feeler, but it does dive a little bit deeper, and I find that really cool because I do think the MBTI as it's practiced today is a little more shallow. For example, even when I talk to friends who like the MBTI and have taken it either officially or unofficially, once I start talking about the cognitive functions and I pull out the old chalkboard and start saying, "Hey, there's more to it than you even know," I can see them get a little bit overwhelmed. I can see the light in their eyes die a little bit. I guess what I'm saying is it's really heartening to see that this foundational work does touch on those nuances and those subtleties. The book also has some really interesting tables, which might be illuminating for people who are encountering these ideas for the first time. So here we have a table demonstrating the differences between extroverted thinking and introverted thinking. And I'll go ahead and read a few of these for you. So extroverted thinking is fed from objective data, facts, borrowed ideas, whereas introverted thinking is fed from subjective and unconscious roots, such as archetypes. Extroverted thinking dwells upon the details of the concrete case, including irrelevancies. Introverted thinking seizes upon the similarities of the concrete case, dismissing irrelevancies. Extroverted thinking has a tendency to multiply facts until their meaning is smothered and thinking paralyzed, whereas introverted thinking has a tendency to neglect facts or to coerce them into agreement with the idea, selecting only those that support the idea. Guilty as charged. Okay, so now I'm going to say a few things about what I didn't appreciate as much about the book. Although some of the type profiles did seem to be accurate, a few others seem to be a little outdated. So for example, the book describes ESFPs and ESTPs as being very conservative and conventional, and while that might sometimes be the case, I don't feel like those are distinguishing traits by any means. I feel like the discussion about typology has evolved beyond certain stereotypes that we see in the book. I was also disappointed that there was only a brief discussion about the idea of transcending your type at the very end of the book. And everybody knows it's a big hobby horse of mine, so I wanted to read more about that. In a lot of ways, it feels like the book is encouraging this functional one-sidedness as a way of being a productive member of society. It only really talks about the development of the primary function and then the auxiliary function. And I do think there's something to be said for that, but I don't like this emphasis on the workplace as much. I feel like we are so much more as beings in the world. And it just overlooks what I find to be so interesting about typology. This idea that we can address the polar opposites within us and make some sort of peace between them and heal those divides as a way of then heading out into the world and healing other divides. For me, that's how I see that visual metaphor of all of us being part of one body functioning. And in a way, the book kind of overlooks such a core part of the Jungian philosophy. It sacrifices something of spiritual depth for the sake of finding the perfect fit for each cog in this consumeristic machine, man. Ultimately, I did enjoy the book, but I would only recommend it if you are a completionist like me, or if you don't know much about typology and you're seeking a good primer. If you'd like to buy a copy of the book, please check out the affiliate link in the description. I would greatly appreciate that. I would get some of that starving artist moolah. Anywho, thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, like the video if you liked it, and tickle the little bell icon. He needs a laugh. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.